Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Eastern Conference final matchup here between the Montreal Canadiens and the Carolina Hurricanes. This is going to be a very interesting series here. Obviously Carolina has been very solid going into this conference finals matchup, whereas, the Montreal Canadiens have been, up and down. They've played the maximum amount of games that they could possibly have played to get to this point, whereas the Carolina Hurricanes have fast-tracked their way here, only playing 8 games and winning all 8 of them. So it'd be definitely interesting to see what goes on between these two teams. But, I think obviously, as always, I think the Canadiens have the capabilities of pulling this thing off and advancing to the Stanley Cup Finals here. But we'll have to see what happens, going into the stats of these two teams here. Newhook and Stankoven, the two goal scoring leaders there. Both of them have 7 goals. Obviously, Newhook has been on fire recently. He had that overtime Game 7 winner. And what's really impressive about Stankoven is he's got those 7 goals in only 8 games played. He's scored in almost every game that he's played, that Carolina has played in this postseason as a whole. So, he's definitely been on fire, to say the least, and someone you got to watch out for. It's kind of an interesting combination as well. If you look at the goal scoring leaders and the guys who are getting points for both teams, and it's really not the star players on either end. It's Stankoven and Taylor Hall who are the highest for goals and points and assists, which are not guys that you would necessarily consider to be the stars, the top of the line in terms of what the Carolina Hurricanes have to offer when they have guys like Sebastian Aho and Svechnikov and all those kind of guys who are also on that roster. You'd expect them to be the ones leading the way, but it's actually Stankoven and Hall. Same thing goes for the Montreal Canadiens with Newhook being our goal leader. You would expect it to be Caulfield or maybe even Suzuki or Slavkovsky, but instead, it's our depth scoring who has really been paying off for us, and it seems like that's pretty similar with the Carolina Hurricanes as well. And then Lane Hutson, of course, has got 14 points in these playoffs here, which is unbelievable. He's got as many points as we have games played throughout this postseason, so he's been unreal. And I think he's definitely going to be, Lane Hutson's going to be a big component in beating the Carolina Hurricanes in this series here. I feel like going into their lineup a little bit, they don't really have a defenseman that's as dynamic as Lane Hutson is on the blue line, whereas the Buffalo Sabres that we just played are very much dynamic from the blue line with all of those first overall picks that they have back there, and Bowen Byram was playing pretty well as well. So I think our defense maybe has a little bit of an edge even on Carolina going into this one, just because of the offensive capabilities that they have from back there that maybe the Carolina Hurricanes don't really have as much. But at the same time, you can't really critique them too much on what they're doing, considering the fact that they've won 8 games in a row. It's definitely nothing to scoff at all. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on. The other thing to look at in this one is Freddie Anderson has been unbelievable. He's got a .950 save percentage, 2 shutouts in 8 games played. He's played all 8 instead of the backup goaltender there. So he's been unreal. Obviously, he's having a vintage performance there. Dobesh, not too bad at all either. He's got that .910 save percentage, 2.52 goals against, whereas Anderson's got a 1.12, which is unbelievable. So you got to give it up to him for sure. But, the goaltending thing is going to be interesting. If you look at all of Carolina's games that they played in these postseason going up into this conference final matchup, they're all pretty low scoring. They're all pretty close games as well. I think Carolina scored, in most 4 goals. I don't think they've ever scored more than 4 goals in a game this whole playoffs. They're not necessarily running teams out of the stadium by any means. It's, like a lot of the games, especially against there's some overtime games that they had against the Senators, and some overtimes against the Flyers there. A lot of games that were decided by 1 or 2 goals total. Obviously, it's very impressive when you can win all 8 of them there. Like, that's nothing to scoff at all. But I think a lot of those games were really close, and I think what you have to really look at in total is that they played close games against teams that aren't exactly incredibly impressive. Especially, I felt like the Flyers as a second round matchup for them was kind of a gift in a little way. I liked the way that the Flyers played. I thought they had a lot of momentum coming into this playoff run, but I can't say, that they were a whole lot of a tough matchup for the Carolina Hurricanes. It was kind of a nice, easygoing 4-game sweep for them there. The Flyers definitely, they had some fight in them. They definitely had the ability to maybe come away with a win in that game, but in that series. But I felt like, generally speaking, the Senators and then the Flames were not much of the Flyers were not much of a matchup for them in the first 2 rounds there. They kind of had a little bit of an easy go at it, and obviously that's what you get when you're the top of your division there, and you're in the you're in the Metro there. It kind of helps you out a little bit, but I think the Carolina Hurricanes are not going to get another sweep in this one. I can tell you that for absolute fact. The Montreal Canadiens are going to be a much bigger challenge for the Canes than what they've seen previously in this playoff series here. I think that the Canadiens, the biggest thing that the Montreal Canadiens bring that I don't think that other teams that they've played against so far do bring is that goal scoring. I feel like the Montreal Canadiens are dynamic offensively from anywhere. Our defense are good at getting in and scoring goals. Obviously, we have a 51 goal scorer on this team, and not even that, but Newhook is scoring 7 goals in 14 games there. Lane Hudson's a point a game right now. So we have a lot of different threats all across our lineup there. Obviously, their goaltending is going to make it tough for us to score at will, but at the same time, Freddie Anderson isn't exactly, known for being the best goaltender in the world. He's had a great start to this postseason, but I think it's definitely possible that the Canadiens can crack him a little bit in this series here, kind of get a little bit under his skin maybe, or just kind of, just to take a little stab at his confidence a little bit and see what happens. I think he's definitely a goaltender who could theoretically crack under pressure a little bit once the Canadiens start putting on some offensive potential towards them. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on there. Obviously, our offense, we've looked at it throughout this postseason. It's been a little bit rocky. I think the Canadiens definitely would like to be a little bit better than they are in terms of general offense, especially from their top line. And Cole Caulfield's only got 4 goals in this postseason. He's not even leading the team, despite the, being like the second in NHL scoring overall this regular season. So we haven't really gotten that going, and I think. I think even despite that, we're in this position, right? So we're getting goal scoring all across our lineup there. So if we can get a little bit more of that going in to this series here, kind of get those guys going, continue to have, our depth scoring for us, I think it's going to be an interesting series. I think if we can get the goal scoring going, score a couple goals in these games, we're going to put the Canes in a position where they have to be, a little bit more offensively minded there. I think, the Canes are a very good team at, just kind of chipping away at the game a little bit. I feel like they're very defensively minded. They play a very solid 2-way game. And again, a lot of the games that we've seen from the Hurricanes going into this, in these first 8 games for them in the playoffs, they very much just kind of, wait for their chances to come. They're not exactly super aggressive. They do put a lot of pucks on net for sure, but not all of the shots on net are incredibly dangerous. But what they do well is they just kind of bide their time for a great scoring chance, and then they capitalize when they need to. But it ends up being a thing where it's just they wait and they wait and they wait, they play defense, they kind of wear you down over the course of a game, just kind of doing the simple things right, getting pucks deep, getting pucks on net, all that kind of stuff. They kind of chew away at the game a little bit, they find their opening, and then they score goals, and then they shut you down in the other way. So it's obviously, and especially with Freddie Anderson having a 950 save percentage in this playoff so far, it's a pretty solid strategy, all things considered. So it's definitely something that the Canadiens, if they're going to win this series, if they're going to win games in this series, they're going to have to find a way to make them kind of play an unfamiliar style of game. And I think if the Canadiens can score goals, they can get themselves on the score sheet and kind of threaten them offensively. The Canes are going to have to play a little bit more aggressive, which is not necessarily their style of play. They'd like to kind of be in control of the game and kind of chip away at it, as I just said. So if we can kind of get them out of that and force them to play from behind a little bit, play with a little bit more urgency, that might kind of throw them off their rhythm a little bit, open up some more scoring chances in our offensive zone there. And I think that might be something the Canadians are going to have to do. I think we should also try, I think if the Canadians can kind of take a page out of Buffalo's book from the 7-game series we played against them, and take a look at the forecheck that Buffalo provided for us. They were all over us. Every single time we were in our own zone, they were making our defensemen make passes that they didn't really feel comfortable making. They were putting hits on behind our own net, and just kind of continuing the pressure over and over and over again. And if we can do kind of something similar with that, especially with our depth lines, just getting in there and putting the pressure on, we're definitely going to be able to generate some offensive opportunities, kind of force them to play outside of where they want to be, kind of rattle them a little bit. And I think that would be a good strategy going into this thing. But in general, I think my big takeaways here for this series, and the things that the Canadians need to do, is they need to be more defensively responsible. I think we saw in the last two series combined, but definitely in this Buffalo series, that the Canadians are getting burnt a little bit on the power play, on the penalty kill anyway. Like taking some like high sticking penalties, that those kind of like stick infractions that aren't necessarily necessary, not really accomplishing a whole lot in terms of defense, but like we're just getting put into the box and put in a situation that we don't want to be in, where we're getting burnt on our penalty kill there, and just like in general, just defensive zone coverage has been a little bit tough, especially in the playoffs. We saw a lot of times the Buffalo Sabres were all over us, as I mentioned before, in our defensive zone, but causing turnovers. We're not really getting a whole lot of offensive zone time. We're spending a ton of time in our own zone, and that's causing some issues there. So if we can play a little bit more responsible, play a little bit more, forward, bounce forward, as as Martin St. Louis says, you gotta, like go forward, skate, downhill a little bit, go into our own zone and spend some time in there. If we can do that a little bit better than what we did against Buffalo in that second round series, I think we'll be in good shape. But if we let the Canes just come at us in waves like the way that Buffalo was doing, in game 6 and 7 there, it's going to be a really tough series. So we have to play some offense. We have to get our offense going. If it all starts with defensive zone responsibility, a little bit of discipline in there as well. But I think in a lot of ways, like, defense is played at all times in the game. Like, there's never a time where you can't be thinking about defense. Even when you're in the offensive zone, you're still playing defense, because they can't score if we're in their zone, right? So we need to spend some time, getting some, extended zone time in the offensive zone, finding ways to, put the Canes on their heels a little bit, make them feel the pressure a little bit. And when we're in our own zone, got to make those strong passes. I feel like there's a lot of times where the Canadians are getting burnt, causing turnovers, all that kind of stuff, because they just can't make, a clear pass. We got to find tape to tape to get out of our own zone and, get into the attacking zone and make stuff happen there. If we're going to spend all of our time, getting stuck in the zone because we can't make, strong plays and, break the puck out, then we're going to be in for a really tough series, because the Canes are going to take advantage, just like Buffalo did on our turnovers. They're going to put pucks on net. They're going to make Dobesh, feel the burn a little bit. So, going into this one, we have to be responsible in our own zone, get some offensive zone time in there, get some shots on net, and use, our offensive talents. I think in general, I would say that the Canes are more offensively talented, as a whole, than the Carolina Hurricanes are. I think the biggest thing that separates us from the Carolina Hurricanes in terms of, what was going on in the regular season, is that the Carolina Hurricanes are just a little bit more consistent. They're a little bit more of a veteran team overall, and they know how to play, a strong two-way game. If we can be, the offensive threat that I know that the Canadians are capable of being, with, all of our lines having offensive threats, Cole Caulfield and Suzuki, Slavkovsky, all of those guys on the top line there, plus all of our depth, if we can get going on offense and score some goals, put some pressure on the Canes, while also trying to be a little bit more defensively responsible, we're going to put the Canes in a tough situation every single one of those games. So I think that's my biggest keys there, is just the Canadians need to find a way to be, a little bit bit more, consistent in both ends of the ice, because that's exactly what the Canes are going to bring. If we can kind of match that a little bit, it'll be good. And I think, if we can match them in terms of consistency at both ends of the ice and be a little bit more elite offensively, which I know that we're capable of, and we definitely have the personnel for, if we can manage to pull this off, I think the Canadiens will find a way to win this series. But we'll have to see. Obviously, it's going to be another nail-biting one. It's going to be an exciting series here. It's definitely a different look, right? The Canadiens versus the Canes here. The Canes a very different team than what we've seen so far in these playoffs, where Tampa was very much a veteran like shove it down your throat kind of, defensive team, and very much a physical team. And Buffalo, kind of the opposite, a little bit of sloppy defensive play by both teams in that one. But, Buffalo very much an offensively minded team. I think the Canes are going to bring somewhere in the middle of that, definitely offensively skilled, but also very consistent defensively. We're going to have to, edge them in one of those categories, either defensively or offensively, to beat them. I don't think we'll be able to be as consistent as they are over the course of a 7-game series. We're going to have to be better than they are in terms of offense going into this series here. So that's pretty much all I've got for this one. I think, it's going to be a very interesting series. The Canes are a very solid team. Again, they're very, very consistent, but if the Canadiens can use their strengths on offense to their advantage, be a little bit more consistent in the defensive zone at the same time, we're going to give them hell in this series, and it's going to be a good one. My, obvious prediction here is the Canadiens are going to win this series in 7 games. At this point, everything is going to be 7 games. We're going to win. We're going to go back and forth over and over and over again. But it all starts with game 1, right? Like, obviously we lost game 1 against Buffalo, and it made it a little bit tough for us. We had to win back-to-back games at one point to stay alive. If we can find a way to win that game 1 here tomorrow, we're going to be in a good position here. So again, that's pretty much all I've got for this one. Canadiens are winning this series in 7 games. That's my prediction. It's going to be a tough series, but the Canadiens can find a way. I think this is where we finally see Cole Caulfield come alive in 5-on-5 play to his strengths here, dissect that defense of the Canes a little bit, score some goals. We'll make this thing happen. So let me know in the comments what you think about this series. It's certainly going to be a tough one. It's going to be exciting to watch. And that is pretty much all I have for this one. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you after game 1 on Thursday.